All right, everybody. Thank y'all for joining us tonight. Hopefully, we're going to have a few more hop on here as time progresses. But tonight, we're going to have Nick Wanick, the ag agent from Cheatham County, give us a presentation about some livestock considerations and kind of essentials getting started with them. So, Nick, I'll let you take it away.
All right. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
Good to hear. Good to hear. How you doing, Cody? You doing good?
I'm doing pretty good. Just got to go find my charger,
Good.
make sure we can have this class.
Well, if you need to dip out, you go ahead.
I'll be right
Um,
back.
yeah, go take your time. Take your time. So a little bit about myself. So my name's Nick Wanick. I'm the ag agent out in Cheatham County. Um, I do want to apologize. I usually try to look a little more professional than I am today. My wife's an ag teacher out at Sycamore High School, and I've been grilling Boston butts for her FFA banquet tonight, and I just wrapped that up about 20 minutes ago. So, like I said, I apologize. Usually try to wear a collared shirt and look a little more presentable, but hopefully y'all be all right with that. Let me share my screen. So I put together a PowerPoint um over kind of some things to consider, if you're thinking about getting into livestock, and which species might be best for you, might fit your operation the best. um just a little bit more about me. Lifelong farmer. I've grown every crop that you can name up, that you can think of. I've had cows, chickens, goats, pigs, a lot of different livestock. I've got a wall full of college degrees. I'm always like to joke that I'm too dumb to quit college. So, I always like to kind of, lead off with that, saying that, I have a little bit of the book smarts, but I also have some of the real world experience, to hopefully make people feel a little better that, I kind of know what I'm talking about here. So like I said, for this homesteading class, I taught college for about 9 years, and I kind of took everything, from several different lessons that I had there and kind of brought it in, but sort of looking through the lens of, homesteaders. Y'all are the audience here. So kind of keeping that in mind, and I'll kind of touch on a um, couple of different aspects of it, as far as, this is what this species looks like commercially, but this is what it looks like, on more of a small scale homestead sort of scale. All right. So first of all, why would you want livestock? And let me preface this by saying, anytime y'all can throw something in the chat. You can unmute yourself, ask a question. I'm pulling the chat up right now. We're going to throw it on the side. So you throw something in the chat. Like I said, you can unmute and just ask a question. I like to have more of a discussion than a me talk, you listen lecture. So first of all, like I said, I'm going to kind of open up here. Why livestock? Why would anybody want livestock, on their property, on their homestead? I'll give y'all a minute to answer that. All right, we're all quiet, so I'll throw a few ideas out there then. Because they're cute, absolutely. Out in Cheatham County, I get calls all the time about people wanting Scottish Highlands. What is a Scottish Highland for? Being adorable. That's what they're good at. Um, so there's any number of reasons you may want one. Um, I have an agriculture economics background, so my mind always goes to the money. Um, but I also realize that, especially kind of in a homesteading situation, it's not always about the money. Let me There we go. So one, you might want companionship. You just like having animals around. They're fun, they're cute. If anybody's ever, sat on a back porch and watched some goats play, it's hours and hours of entertainment. Um, Lifestyle. Now, what do I mean by lifestyle? Well, a lot of people want that rural lifestyle, and I understand that, and as I was putting this presentation together, I kind of got thinking I've got cows of my own, and we sell at market and try to make a profit on it when we can. Um, but it kind of brings me back to a saying that my dad always said. He said, we're growing cows, we're growing hay, we're growing tobacco, but the main thing we're growing is kids. Um, and I really feel that too. More than making any kind of profit on my cows. Um, I just love that my kids are able to grow up around it and know that we've got to feed the cows, got to put hay out during the winter. We've got to give them shots and do those kind of things year round. And it's more about the lifestyle than it is, any kind of thing like a profit. Income, once again, everybody likes making a little money. A little more money is always better than a little less money. So if you can make a little money, that's fantastic. I have a lot of new and beginning farmers in Cheatham County that their goal is not necessarily, it's not to make a living farming. We don't have many full-time farmers where I'm at, and it's been that way a long time. I'm a Cheatham County native. We don't have many full-time farmers, but we got a lot of people that try to make a little side money, a little income on the side. Um, things like that. And food. That's a big part of this kind of, homesteading, back to basics, natural lifestyle. Um, is being able to produce your own food, whether it be, trying to avoid, pharmaceuticals or chemicals, or just being kind of more in tune with the food you eat. That's always a great thing. My family, for years and years, we've always killed hogs, and we make sausage, and that's the sausage we eat year round. All right, so we're coming back to these kind of considerations of what you need to start having some of your own livestock. Um, Kind of the first question you need to start with, sort of baseline, is which one is best for you. And as an ag extension agent, I get calls all the time. I see farmers all the time and landowners that say, um, I want cows. Okay. Well, first thing I kind of, rebut with or question with is, well, why do you want cows? Well, I like cows. They're cute. Or I hear they're making a lot of money in cows. Um, but you really need to think long and hard about this and kind of consider what is the best livestock for you. And I've said this, a long time. I've seen it with my own eyes many, many, many times. You'll have two farms. Basically think, one giant field. Um, think one giant field, but have it split up in two farms with a fence in the middle. Those can be completely different operations. It's a lot of things to consider, not just, what kind of land you have, how much land you have. Do you have, pasture or forest? Is it hilly? Is it flat? These are all considerations, and it all plays into what is the best option for you. Like I said, you can have two nearly identical operations side by side, sharing a fence line, that can handle things completely different, and both of them be very successful. So first thing to kind of consider is land, right? Kind of touch on some of these a little bit. Acreage, do you have 2 acres? Do you have 10 acres? Do you have 20 acres? Do you have 200 acres? That's obviously going to make a big impact on what it is you can grow. What kind of livestock really fits your operation the best? Is your land more wooded or pasture? Kind of leading into that, is it sloped? Is it flat? Um, these things don't necessarily knock you out of, it's not a binary. Yes, you can have livestock. No, you can't. But it should inform your decision on which livestock and how you grow it. I've got a friend, for example, out in Cheatham. He has about 25 acres. It is 100% hills, hollows, and forest. He grows goats up on top of the hill, and they are absolutely thriving. Lower down the hill, he is growing pigs. They root around for acorns. It's a really remarkable operation. Um, Now, would he be well suited for cows? Probably not. His land just doesn't lay in a way that's really suitable, for cows. Um, and then also, I want to bring this in the community. Do you live in a subdivision with a quarter acre? Right? Because if you live in a subdivision quarter acre, you probably don't want cows. But backyard chickens might not be out of the question. It might be a very well suited. It might be a very well suited way to go about things. So, um, take into consideration the community you're in, the neighbors. Do you have neighbors close by? And not just in the aspect of, once again, a binary. Yes, I can have animals because I don't have any neighbors, or no, I can't have animals because I have a lot of neighbors. Um, but just kind of help that inform your decision on, what fits best. If you live, have neighbors close by, you may have 1,000 acres, but if you have an area close to neighbors that you want to put some livestock, maybe pigs aren't the best. Pigs smell. It's not a great odor. If you haven't been around pigs much, maybe that's not the best option. Maybe goats, sheep, cows, chickens, something like that, may be a little better suited. Facilities. So facilities, what kind of facilities do you have, and what kind of facilities are needed? The first is, do you have a barn? If you have a barn, okay, what kind of barn is it? Is it suited for, larger animals, like cows, or maybe, kind of those small ruminants, sheep and goats, or is it just a shed that maybe you could put a few chickens in? A mobile, when I wrote mobile as a point in here. Mobile chicken tractors are fantastic. I've got producers in my area that are doing extremely successful, growing hundreds and hundreds of meat birds on chicken tractors, moving them every few days. And it's fantastic. And then consider utilities. Do you need utilities? Do you have utilities? If you have cows, they're going to need water. Maybe you have a pond, maybe you don't. If you have a nice barn out back, well, maybe you need power to have some chickens out there for a brooder, to keep them warm as they're growing or something like that. Maybe, once again, maybe not. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but it will just kind of, inform your decision on the best practices. Labor, right? This is one that's overlooked a whole lot. How much time can you dedicate, to this enterprise? If you have dairy cows, they have to be milked. They have to be milked at least every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And this is one of those you really need to sit back and, look in the mirror and say, is this something I can feasibly do? A lot of my producers, and a lot of you as well, you have a full-time 9 to 5 job. And you've got to think, what happens if, I have goats and one of my goats gets sick? Is it something I can work around? Do I have the type of job that I can work around? And, I have a goat get sick and I need to go doctor it in the middle of the day or the middle of the night. Or is it something that I really, kind of leading to the second point here, sort of have a set schedule where, I'm tied up during these hours and I really can't deal with them at any other times. And kind of physical ability leading into that last point there. How much can you actually handle? Once again, this is kind of an introspective question that, you really need to ask yourself before you go headfirst into the deep end of getting livestock. How much can you, um, how much can you actually handle? Um, are you able to, take cows and, load them up to the dock, to the veterinarian or things like that when you need to? Or is a goat something a little more, manageable physically? Is that going to be a better fit? Um, and a big one to think about is fencing, right? Or containment. Um, when you think about what livestock you want, what kind of fencing do you need? I've had cows my whole life, 3, 4 strands of barbed wire generally keeps them in. I used to have goats. I always said that you can build a fence for goats, and if you can throw a bucket of water through it, it probably won't hold a goat. They are notorious. They are magicians. They are Houdinis for getting out all times of the day and night. Um, so, what kind of fencing do you have? What kind of fencing do you need? And how hard is it to keep it maintained? Amount, right? That kind of ties back into how much acreage you have. And you can also tie this into how much money it's going to cost. Barbed wire, relatively cheap. You can throw it around, throw in some T-post, staple it off to trees, fairly inexpensive. But if you get into, welded wire or woven net wire, something like that, it can add up pretty quick, especially if you have a lot of acreage. Strength, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but um, coming back to the fencing type, are you going to need a high tensile fence? Are you going to need regular barbed wire? Are you going to need one strand of electric? Are you going to need um, electric net, woven wire, things like that? And this all comes back, once again, kind of my agriculture economics background comes back to cost. How much is all this going to cost? And sort of tying a lot of this together is that last point. What are you going to do when the animals get out? Not if they get out, when they get out. If you have animals, if anybody, if you've had animals in the past, eventually, with enough time, they'll find their way out of there. What does that look like, as far as going back a couple of points to scheduling? What does that look like as far as, cost of fixing fencing? How are you going to handle that? Once again, these are just kind of some things to think about before you jump in the deep end of getting livestock. Um, so another consideration, kind of the scale of operation. What are you looking for? What are your goals with this? Are you trying to have, I have a really close, friend of mine, a producer out in Cheatham. She keeps 2 steers year round. One, she's always kind of fattening up. It's on the feed. The other one is more of a pasture animal. And she puts a steer in the freezer every 6 months. And when that one goes in the freezer, the next one kind of graduates up to the feedlot and she brings in another steer. Is that what you're looking for? Or are you looking to make a little money off of this? So what scale are you looking at? Because that really dictates what kind of an operation you need to have. Can you get by, if you're looking into, say, dairy goats or dairy cows or something like that for your homestead? If you have one or two, one cow or a few goats, that's something you can, can you milk it by hand, or are you going to need, a surge milker that costs a couple of $1,000s, or are you milking a whole lot trying to make a little money on the side and you're going to need tens of thousands of dollars in milking equipment? So really think about the scale of where you're starting and where you want to be. Find out where you fit, not just where you fit at the moment, but where you fit, where you want to be. Once again, kind of setting goals. Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Um, and really kind of set yourself up for that. All right, so kind of going back to this scale, just a couple of definitions here. Um, a little background here. everybody in this group, considered a homesteader. That's kind of the flag we fly. So what is kind of, I want to start off with what is the sort of extreme opposite of that. And that would be what we call a CAFO. Has anybody ever heard of, I'm not sure if anybody's ever heard of CAFO. It's kind of the feedlot model, the factory farm model. And now, being homesteaders, this is sort of the opposite of what we're really going for here. So CAFO, it's an acronym. I've heard it a couple of different ways: confined animal feeding operation or concentrated animal feeding operation. I've heard both of those. But something, kind of how we describe this, it's really kind of an economies of scale model. So it's the Walmart syndrome. We may have heard that term a time or two, where these large, feedlots, they can offer better prices than a smaller, operation can. And I tell people this, and I don't know if everybody believes me, but it's the God's honest truth. I've got, 20 mamas, I'm not a big operation or anything, but I've got 20 mama cows running around, in the pastures on my farm. They have a calf every year. It is cheaper for me to buy beef at the grocery store than it would be for me to finish that calf, bring it up to slaughter weight, send it off, have it packaged at, $3-4 a pound. What is going on here? Sorry, technical difficulties. Have it processed for $3 or $4 a pound. Even though, we can kind of look at this, my calf as more or less free. It really doesn't cost me anything to have this calf, in the field. But with all that said, I can take a free calf and it's going to cost me more to turn it into ground beef or steaks or something like that than I can buy at the grocery store. Now, why is that, right? People ask me, well, that really doesn't, that's kind of counterintuitive. It really doesn't make sense. But when you think about the economies of scale, where a feedlot will have literally hundreds of thousands of cows at a time, they send it to a meat packer that processes hundreds of thousands of animals a day. It is so efficient that it's cheaper for me to send a cow out to, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, finish it out for 6 months, ship it up to the upper Northwest, upper Midwest to have it packaged, have it packed out and shipped back to Tennessee. All of that is still cheaper than it is for me to send one. Now, a lot of people have a problem with that, and I'm not a fan myself. I don't necessarily feel like this is a good model, but that's how the economics of it work. Poultry is the same way. About 99% of the poultry industry is ILP. Now, I guess I didn't put that in there. ILP, it's another name for feedlot, factory farm, CAFO. It stands for intensive livestock production. So just another one of those acronyms. It all kind of means the same. But about 99% of poultry, be it chickens, eggs, turkey, any of those products, they're going to come off a, quote unquote factory farm. And once again, this doesn't necessarily sit well with a lot of people, and I totally understand why. Swine industry, we're running around 80%. 80% of the pork in the market today comes from large scale factory farms. Dairy industry, we're talking about 75%. These numbers are a little dated, so honestly, that would probably be a bit higher. The beef industry is a little bit of a mixed model. Depending on what study you look at and what definitions, they follow, it's about 50-50. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean half of the beef you buy comes from a local farm? Not necessarily. The beef industry kind of comes typically a cow-calf operation, much like I do and much like most producers in Middle Tennessee do, where Calves are born, they're bred, get a cow and a bull, we breed, we have a calf born, we grow it up to a certain weight, and then we sell it. And then it goes out to those, large scale feedlots, things like that. So not necessarily 50-50 the beef you get, but if you want to think of it this way, basically the first half of its life is on a local farm, cow calf operation like you see around here. And then the second half is really kind of on a feedlot, sort of, trying to finish it out by, a larger company. Now, there are pros and cons to this. Cheap food, that's probably the easiest one that goes to, the easiest one to think about. Like I said, I can buy beef, cheaper at the grocery store than I can doing it myself on my own farm. It puts out a lot of food, right? It is a very efficient system. If efficiency is what you're looking for, then these CAFOs, ILPs, things like that are really kind of the gold standard. It gives us a uniform product. I can go to Kroger, I can go to Food Line, I can go to Walmart, and I can get a relatively uniform product of ground beef or ribeyes or sirloins or chicken breast. A pound of ground beef is a pound of ground beef is a pound of ground beef. When you buy it off a small farm, that's not necessarily the case. Some may be leaner, some may be fatter. But in this ILP system, this factory farm system, it gives a very uniform product. And it does create a lot of jobs. All these feedlots, all of these slaughterhouses, it does create a lot more jobs than if I were just doing it myself. Now, just like pros, there's obviously going to be some cons. There's a risk of pollution. I have 20 cows on, say, 60 acres. Manure is not an issue for me. It really doesn't end up, in waterways or groundwater, anything like that. But if I have, 100 cows per acre over 1,000 acres, this is a lot of manure. This is a lot of issues that can come about it. Disease of scale. This is one I think we're all kind of, familiar with, in that when we have, 40,000 chickens in a broiler house where they have 1 square foot per bird, disease can spread very fast. Now, we've all lived through COVID and we know about social distancing and avoiding crowds to, slow the spread and all those things. Same thing happens with our livestock. So when we have 40,000 birds in a house, or we have 100,000, cows on a feedlot, disease can spread very quickly. It does decrease small farm and small towns. There's social changes. There's changes to economic structure. A lot of the areas, in Middle Tennessee especially, used to be agriculture farming communities. And, kind of the joke and extension is that the number one crop we're growing these days are houses. That changes the whole community dynamic when you go from a rural farming community to a more suburban community. We have, risk of monopolies. We're seeing some of that in our beef markets today. Beef prices at the grocery store are incredibly high because there are only about 4 companies that basically run, I forget the number. I want to say 80 something percent of the beef market is owned by 4 companies. 4 companies own almost all of the chicken production. It's a very oligopoly, trying to think of the word for that, oligopolistic system, where just a few big players can really, change prices, change the market, change the system. There's a risk of the food supply. We've seen this a few years ago when egg prices went up. Bird flu came in, and egg prices, shot through the roof. It was $5, $6, $7 per dozen eggs. Multiple other examples, of those things, where if you have your own livestock, if you have your own chickens, that none of that really dictates any of your none of that really dictates, any those prices don't really affect you as much. And there are drastic market changes. We see this a lot of times. These can be positive or negative. So in the beef industry, prices are very high. They're historically high. Cattle farmers are making better money than they have in a very, very long time. Um, but just as quickly, those prices can take a downturn where you have a certain amount of market and food security, if you're raising your own livestock, or at least on a smaller, maybe state, community, regional scale. Any questions, by the way, while we're, kind of a good stopping point? Any questions on any of this? I've kind of rambled on for a while. All right, seeing none, I'll move on. Um, and you'll hear me bring this up a little later. Everything in this, in this lecture, this presentation, I'm kind of indexing it, sort of basing it off a standard of beef cattle. Um, I'm kind of comparing everything to beef cattle, and here's why. Beef cattle are the number one livestock industry in Tennessee. It brings in more money. There are more farmers that raise beef than other things. So I'm kind of using it as sort of a litmus test or sort of a yardstick to sort of compare some of the others to. But a little bit about the beef industry. So typically, there's a few different segments that people can fall into. The first one is going to be feeder calves. So this is a lot of times it's called a cow-calf operation, where calves are born. They're raised up usually around 7 months, 500 pounds. Now all these are very rough numbers, and this has actually changed quite a bit in the last probably 2 years with the prices of beef changing. We have beef farmers that are selling cows now a little lighter to get a little more revenue coming in sooner. But ballpark around 7 to 10 months, around I'll say 400 to 700 pounds. Once again, kind of depending on the operation. This is the number one product in Tennessee as far as livestock goes, in number of farmers and incomes. Once again, this is a very common, kind of marketing structure that we see in the area. Calves are pretty easily raised, pretty low management, pretty low labor. A lot of farmers just kind of let the bull in with the cows, let them do their thing. And you'll have calves, roughly once a year, grow them up a little while, sell them off, make some money. The average herd size in Tennessee is about 30 cows. Stocker calves. Now, this is kind of the next step up, where a producer will buy the cows off the cow-calf operation farm from about 500 to about 750 pounds. Once again, these numbers, with the market being the way it is the last couple of years, these are, a little broader now. So these are very rough numbers. So they'll buy them about 500 pounds, fatten them up a little bit, put them on grain, and then turn around and sell them to the next step up, which is the finished cattle market. That can be buy them about 750, sell them up to 1,000, 1,200 pounds ish. Ballpark around 14 months old. Once again, kind of varies there, 14 to 18 months, somewhere around in there. And send them to the slaughterhouse at that point. We see this with some freezer beef operations in Tennessee, but this is really kind of the feedlot level, if you want to think of it that way, where a lot of these animals, in Middle Tennessee, will end up going out west to the feedlots. And then we have, kind of the breeding stock, more of a rich man's hobby, where we're looking at bloodlines, EPDs, if anybody's familiar with those. Where we're not selling terminal animals that are going to be turned into steaks, but we're selling breeding animals that are going to produce us more calves. All right, so that's kind of a broad view of a lot of things. Now let's get a little more, species specific here. Get back to the idea of what what species, what type of livestock would be best for your operation. So a couple of things to consider, and I'm going to use these once again to kind of look at, different species and think about which one would be best for my small farm, for my homestead. The first is labor. Now, labor, I'm using this as a very broad term. This can mean physical labor, how much time and effort am I going to have to put into these animals? But also kind of going back to those scheduling considerations. Is this something that I'm going to have to, is this animal something I'm going to have to work with 7 days a week, or can I go on vacation to the beach for a week out of the summer? Next, capital. When I say capital, what I really mean is money. How much does it cost to get into this? If I've got 10 acres and I want some animals, grazing out back, give me some food for my family, give me, something to look at while I'm sipping my coffee in the mornings, give me something good to, teach my kids some responsibility. How much is that going to cost me? If I have this set, 10 acres. Fencing, once again, a huge consideration to think about. What kind of fencing does each animal need? Because every animal needs a different type of fencing. The fences I have for my cows on my farm, if I were to turn a goat loose, they would walk right through it, wouldn't even know it's there. It would take substantial upgrades on my fencing, if I wanted to move over to goats or sheep or something like that. Facilities. What kind of facilities do I have? Do I have a barn? Do I need a barn? Do I need just a small run-in shelter, a little carport out in my 10-acre pasture? Or can I get by with just a little chicken tractor and move it around the yard every couple of days? Equipment. Do I need a $4,000 squeeze chute to work my cows? Or can I get by with just kind of manually, handling goats that are a little smaller? Do I need feed troughs? Do I have a pond? Do I need a feeder? Can I pour it on the ground, a feed on the ground? These are things to think about. And feed. Is this something I'm going to have to feed year round? Am I going to have to feed hay during the wintertime? Am I going to have to feed, chicken scratch to my chickens year round? Just all kind of things to think about. Veterinary cost. And this kind of ties into, maybe some of the others above. If I'm raising, meat birds, if I'm growing some chickens and it gets sick and it dies, I may have $10 in it. It may not be that much of an issue. Do I need to spend $150, $200 to have a veterinarian come out and look at my $10 chicken versus I have a $3,000 calf? Do I need to spend $150, $200, $1,000? Is it worth any of that to have my veterinarian come out and look at it? Acreage. This is probably, the easiest one to kind of wrap your head around. Do I have the land for animals? We'll talk a little bit ballpark about how much land each animal needs. But do I have a cow that's going to need acres and acres, or do I, want a half dozen egg laying hens that I can, put in a movable chicken tractor in a subdivision? All things to consider. And something to think about, this is all relative. Everybody is at a different place. Everybody's operation looks a little differently. Is this something, can I drop $10,000 on some cattle equipment, or am I more in a situation to drop $100 on some tractor supply chickens and some feeders and waters and things like that? Can I get away with, do I need a $2,000 squeeze chute with a rotisserie to trim my goat's hooves, or can I get away with, just kind of holding it, giving it medicine, in a barn stall? It's all kind of relative. All this is sort of variable. You can kind of make it work for the most part, for your operation. And that kind of leads to the next point, operational variability. Sort of like I talked about earlier, you can have two farms in one giant field and they can be completely different operations. One may work great one way and another may work great another way. I have many farmers, many producers that have cows that they will go out once a week and they will check their cows and they will vaccinate every 2 months and they will check hooves and trim hooves and treat for mastitis and do blood work and all those things. And right next door to them, I may have a cattle farmer who only time he really handles his cows is when he loads them up to take them to market. Is one better than the other? That's really kind of hard to say because there's so much, variability in each of those two operations. So first species we're going to talk about, once again, beef cattle. I said I'm going to I'm sort of going to kind of use this as a yardstick to sort of measure everything against. Now, maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong, but my logic behind that is, dollars wise, economic wise, this is the number one, livestock commodity in Tennessee by far. It outdoes chicken and hogs by large margins. It outdoes, dollars produced. It outdoes small ruminants, goats and sheep, by, multiple factors. So, this is kind of our starting point, and we're going to sort of measure, these other type of livestock against beef cattle. So labor, relatively low. Once again, I'm saying relative here because you can do with it what you want. My dad, he passed away, but he was a very kind of old school farmer, and sort of his mentality was the less money you put into them, the more profit you have when you sell them. I don't do it that way, but it served him fairly well. He didn't, spend a lot of money on vaccinations. He didn't spend a lot of money on high-blooded bulls. He would check the cows driving down the driveway every day. Very kind of hands off. And we look at beef cattle compared to a lot of these other, livestock species that we're going to talk about. It's a relatively low, fairly hands off operation. Even if you're one of those that, checks the EPDs, buys the best bulls, keeps them, updated on the latest, greatest vaccinations, those kind of things, it's still a relatively low labor species. Capital. I'm kind of putting this at sort of a medium high level because there is a pretty big, like I talked about in the last couple of years, there's been a pretty big upswing in the market. I have people call my office very regularly and say, "Hey, I hear cattle farmers are making a lot of money. I want to get in the cow business." And I have to tell them, sorry, buddy, it's really not a good time because, yeah, they're making a lot of money, but you're on the buying end of things. So it's really expensive to get into right now. A cow that used to be $300-400 is now $2,000. It kind of pair that with, sort of leading to the next one here, fencing, equipment, things like that. It can be pretty pricey if you're starting from ground zero. If you have a piece of land that was once a cattle farm, maybe you have a little bit of equipment, maybe you have a barn needs some attention. That's a really good starting point. If you're starting from ground zero, the capital, it can be very expensive. I'll say that. Fencing, I'm putting fencing kind of at a medium category. And inflation has changed things, but depending on what study you look at, and University of Tennessee with Extension, we have a lot of publications on this. Prices can be anywhere $4, $5, $6 a linear foot for barbed wire fencing. Now you can put that up that's including labor and everything. You can put it up a good bit cheaper than that. Um, it's not the most expensive fencing out there. It's not nearly as expensive if you put in, um, net wire or something, or high tensile or something like that. But it's not cheap either. Facilities a pretty high cost. And once again, this is all relative, and I think I compare this to, say a goat or sheep. I know producers, very good producers. They have basically a run-in shelter built out of scrap wood and pallets, and some leftover barn tin that they got from a neighbor, and it does totally fine. It would be pretty hard to come up with enough stuff like that for a legitimate, you know, cattle barn. Um, obviously it's going to be bigger. We have bigger animals. You need a little more working space because you can't just run out and grab one around the neck like you can a goat if you need to give it a shot or something like that. Um, so it's a pretty high facilities cost. Equipment, once again, very high. Um, a decent working system being, corral panels, sorting gates, squeeze chute, maybe a sweep tub. You're looking probably $10,000 on the cheap end, up to as much as you want to spend. That's going to be considerably higher than if you get some backyard chickens or you get some goat or sheep or something like that. Feed, once again, this is one, it really varies. I know farmers that spend very little money on feed. They have a very low stocking rate, so they have a lot of acreage per cow. So they can get away with not putting any hay out until, mid-December, and maybe only feed hay for a couple of months during the winter, and then they're fine. I also know farmers that are kind of the opposite of that. And once again, neither of them is wrong, but they're a little more intense on the feed, where they're giving, free choice feed, buying it, 5-10 tons at a time. It all just kind of depends on your operation. Veterinary, once again, it varies. I know farmers that don't put a lot in, I guess you'd say, health and maintenance, and once again, not necessarily in a bad way either. Um, I know a lot of farmers that want, kind of like my dad, the less money we put in, the more money, profit we have on the back end. And it kind of works because, sort of pairing with that idea, is that we don't bring in any new animals that can, bring in disease, have to quarantine, things like that. So it tends to work. But I also know farmers that are, given the latest, greatest vaccine every, 6 to 8 weeks, and that can add up pretty quick. Um, Now, in a veterinary emergency, cows are going to be pretty high. Um, so I say it varies, but in the case of, you have an abscess or a foot problem, or, some, little bloating cow or something like that, it's going to be quite a bit more than, comparable other livestock, sheep, goats, things like that. Now acreage, um, in Tennessee, the average is around 2 acres per cow. Um, that can be a little misleading. Once again, that's average. So for every person that has 3 acres, there's a person out there that has 1 acre. But this kind of comes back to, sort of that point on feed, but average is ballpark around 2 acres. So, if somebody has 100 acres, very broad numbers here, you can have 50 mama cows, a bull, and they can each have a calf per year, and you'll be about right. Um, Now, on a different scale, and this is sort of why I talked about it a couple slides back, was if I have 6 acres, does that mean I can have 3 cows? Not necessarily, because you'll still need a bull in there to breed them. So, okay, now we have 2 cows and a bull. And that's 33% of your calf herd right there. Um, and then something else to think about: mini cows. Mini cows, depending on, these are going to be our Dexter, our Zebu. Scottish Highlands, they're not classified as a mini, but they are a good bit smaller. But those are very popular breeds for, small acreage, those 5, 10, 15 acre farms, because you can get more animals, on the same area. Now, what is that conversion ratio? Sort of hard to put a number on. I've heard people say you can put two minis. I mean, 3 minis for 2 full-grown cows. So you could put, 3 Dexters on 4 acres instead of 2 regular size animals. Um, but once again, that there's a lot of variability in that. How does your land lay? Is it pasture? Is it wooded? Is it shaded? So that's sort of hard to put a number on, but something considered that a lot of homesteaders, an option that a lot of homesteaders have really considered to be, a good option. Dairy cows. Once again, comparing back to beef cattle, labor is going to be a lot higher. You have to milk these once or twice a day, kind of a homestead operation, 2 to 3 times a day, or more of a commercial operation. It's really hard. You can't miss a day. If you miss a day, the production curve on that cow is going to be negatively impacted, for the rest of that milking cycle. So you have to be with them every day. You have to milk them, whether it be by hand or, mechanically milked. Capital compared to beef cows, this is once again generally higher. Pretty much everything you need for a beef cow, you'll need for a dairy cow, and then some. Whether it be a milking equipment, a milking parlor, different, more supplemental feed. But there is some variability to it. Are you milking by hand? Are you milking with machine? Things like that. Fencing, once again, about like beef cows. A beef cow, 3-4 strand barbed wire fence will generally hold in a dairy cow just like a beef cow. Facilities, once again, it's going to be higher than beef cows, kind of using that as a standard. You're going to have everything you need for a beef cow, but you'll also need, an area for milking, a milking parlor. You'll need some cooling equipment to keep your milk cool. If you decide to pasteurize your milk, you need specialized equipment for that kind of thing. So you'll need everything for beef cows plus a little more. Equipment, once again, everything you need for a beef cow, you need for a dairy cow, but do you need that milking equipment? Are you doing it by hand? There is some variability there. You can save some dollars, but is it necessarily worth it? Maybe, maybe not, depending on your operation. Feed, generally, it's going to be higher than a beef cow. Lactation on a dairy cow is it's very hard, very trying on, the body of a milk cow. So they're generally going to need a little higher quality feed, a little more feed, and that's going to cost more money. It's going to be quite a bit more effort. Veterinary, once again, varies. How are you handling this? More hands-on, more hands-off. Acreage, once again, variable. I know people that have dairy cows that are sticking close to that 2 acres per cow of pasture land. Most dairies, especially on the commercial side, that's going to be considerably lower because they are supplementing with, feed, silage, grain, things like that. So you don't need as many acres of pasture if you're, feeding your cow as opposed to letting them just free range. Swine. So pigs. Pigs, I say medium low. They will generally, I've had pigs and cows at the same time, and you're going to have to give more attention to your pigs. Now, what does that look like? There's a lot of variability to it. Are you kind of, pasture raising pigs, where you're more hands off? Are they in more of a farrowing crate, feedlot kind of system, heated and cooled in a barn? I have producers that do that. And that's going to be more. So I say medium low. Um, Generally, it's not going to be near kind of the labor, the scheduling requirements as a dairy cow, but it's going to be more hands-on than say a beef cow. That's fairly low labor. Um, Capital, once again, medium low. You can get into pigs pretty reasonably. If you don't have any pigs, they're I hadn't looked at prices in a little while. I bought some pigs for an extension class I did, and they were $1.25 a pound. So I think I bought a 250-pound pig for around $300. Now that was slaughter, ready to go. You can get piglets very reasonably, get into the pig business very easily. Um, it's a really good option, kind of leading into this if you have small acreage. Now, fences, you're going to need high quality fences, but they don't need a lot of acreage. And once again, kind of jumping ahead here, I've got a producer. They've run, a boar, six or seven sows. Um, they've probably got it on quarter acre, maybe, and that's, I mean, you wouldn't even have to have that much. But with that, they get 35, 30 to 40 piglets per breeding cycle, get three of those a year. So, they're getting 100, 120 piglets a year and they're selling them. They're making some money. They're fattening some up, getting hams and sausage and bacon and things like that. On a quarter acre. So like I said, kind of jumping the gun here. Kind of the caveat to that small acreage is you need pretty good fences. Pigs, they're naturally rooting animals. The way their snout's built, they're made, they're really kind of evolved to sort of dig up root crops, things like that. So fences, you need something to anchor that fence down. You'll need net fencing, not the cheapest, but once again, you don't need a lot of it. But you'll need something to anchor it down. So either, I've seen people take, rebar or some post or something, kind of bend it, make some sort of staples, hold it down. A really common one is they'll find cross ties like on railroad tracks, and they'll put those basically a perimeter on the inside of the fence so that pig can't root that up and get under the fence. So fencing, it's expensive fencing per foot, but not necessarily a lot. Facilities, once again, I'm going to say medium on this, kind of variable. Um, the people that I was just talking about, they have basically a run-in shelter built out of some used roofing metal, some pallets, 2x4s, things like that, and it works fantastic. I've got another producer. He has a facility with automatic watering, heat and air, automatic feeding, coming out of a silo. So it's really, what do you want? What scale do you want to go? And it's sort of a trade-off between, that labor. You can go out and feed coffee cans of feed to your hogs every day. You can give them your table scraps, or you can order, you know, uh, hog rations from co-op by the ton. It's just sort of, what do you want to do and what does your operation allow? Equipment, fairly low. You don't need a lot of specialized equipment for, loading, unloading in a trailer, something like that. There are kind of some specific, tighter, smaller panels that work really well, better than, finding some used cattle panels on marketplace or something like that. And once again, you can spend as much as you want to do. The guy that I got know that raises, has the automated system. No telling how many tens of thousands of dollars he spent, but once again, I've got people right down the road from him who don't have any of that, and it works just as well. Feed, this kind of varies a little bit depending on the system. So you can go the small acreage and basically, kind of get in the mindset of every calorie that pig is going to eat is going to come out of my, out of feed. But I also have another producer, a good friend of mine. He has forest raised hogs that root around on his hills and hollows and eat acorns, and they do fantastic. Veterinary, once again, it varies a bit. Hogs aren't necessarily expensive, so from a pure economic standpoint, do you necessarily need a veterinarian, or is it something that needs to be put down? It's sort of in the middle. Um, Depending on how much you want to spend or how much you don't want to spend. Acreage, once again, very low. Generally, you can do pasture raised and put as many acres as you want to, but not unnecessarily. Small ruminants, these are sheep and goats. Labor, fairly medium. They're fairly hands off, probably a little more intense than, sort of the hands off beef cows that we talked about. Not it's a good idea to work with them, check on them every day, maybe manually feed them so you got eyes on them, knowing how healthy they are. Not necessarily a necessity in all operations. Capital, once again, medium. I know farmers that have built $100,000 barns for their high-end sheep, and I know producers that have bought a carport for $300 on Marketplace, and that works just as well for their operation. Fencing, high. Sheep aren't as bad as goats, but goats, they are Houdinis. You'll do everything you can to keep them in, and they'll still get out. I'm a little jaded from the goats I had, if I'm being completely honest here. But fencing, it's always going to be an uphill battle. You're going to need to check those fences early and often to make sure your fences are up to snuff to keep those goats and sheep in. Welded wire or net wire is going to be your best bet. Barbed wire, straight strand, high tensile, things like that, probably not going to be your best bet unless you put a whole lot of them there. Facilities relatively low. You can spend as much as you want on a goat or sheep barn, but you can get out fairly inexpensively as well. Equipment costs fairly low, and the big reason for this is they're a smaller animal. I know a lot of very successful small ruminant farmers with goat and sheep that really don't have any specialized equipment because they're small enough that they can go out, and if they need to vaccinate a sheep or a goat, they can catch it by hand, use a shepherd's hook, catch it by the foot, throw a rope around it, hobble the legs, give it a shot, move on with life. Where if we're looking at a beef cow or a dairy cow or something larger like that, you're going to need a full-on squeeze chute to really do any of those things. Feed, once again, varies. I know farmers that use a lot of feed on small acreage, and I know other producers that use almost no feed on very, woolly, what I would call, kind of a weedy pasture. But more for goats than sheep. That's really what they're looking for. They're browsers, not foragers. So they need a little bit of a lot of different plants. So I know some people that get away with a lot less feed. Veterinarian costs, kind of variable. I may not even should have put this on any of those because it's sort of variable on a lot of them, depending, once again, how much money you really want to spend on one. Acreage, fairly low. Depending what study you look at, goats and sheep, you can roughly, kind of a rough rule of thumb, very rough rule of thumb. Like I said, a lot of variables in here. Is it steep? Is it wooded? Is it pasture? You can get around 6 goats or sheep per cow. So you're talking, on the 2 acres, you can have 1 cow or say 6 goat or sheep. Once again, a lot of variability in there. You get into, dwarf, Nigerian dwarf, pygmy goats, things like that. You can get away with even more. Some larger breed goats, Boers, Kikos, it'd probably be closer to 4.5, 5 head, per 2 acres. Poultry. I'm trying to kind of fly through this. I know we're getting short on time here, and I can be long-winded, so I'm going to kind of move this a little faster. Poultry. Now, a couple of ways to look at this. Look at it purely as backyard poultry. So this can be, I want 3 hens that give me 2 or 3 eggs a day, and I have it with my breakfast, and that's great. Or you can look at it as I want 100 meat birds and still a backyard operation, but a little more intense. But generally, that cost is going to be low. Either way you go. You can have a movable chicken tractor, build you a small chicken coop, buy you, a fine chicken coop from Tractor Supply for five, six, $700, and you're in the business. Or you can spend as much money as you want. Capital, once again, very low. Any one of us can go to Tractor Supply and buy, some Rhode Island Reds for $3.99, and they come home in a cute little box. Where to buy a single calf is going to cost you $1,500, $2,000. So it's very easy to get into. Poultry, backyard chickens is, in my opinion, probably the best way to kind of dip your toes into the livestock area. It gives you a good test of kind of low stakes. You got to work with them a little bit every day, feed them, collect eggs, but it's not terribly high stakes where it's like a dairy cow where if you miss a day or two, then production's really going to tank. Fencing, relatively low. Once again, you can use electric net wire and put you out, 100 by 100 patch for a few $100s. You can get you a movable chicken tractor and drag it around with a lawnmower every day. Very easily, very affordable to get into. Facilities, once again, very low. Don't really need any specialized equipment. You don't need a specialized squeeze chute or anything like that, like you would for a cow. Equipment cost kind of goes along with that. Low. There's not really any special high dollar equipment you need. Feed, once again, kind of varies. If you have, 3 chickens in a 6x6 movable chicken tractor, you're probably going to give them a little more scratch feed than if you have, 10 chickens that are free range, on your 50 acres. Still need to give them some supplemental feed to make sure they're getting what they want. But there's a lot of variability, and it's really, poultry and backyard chickens are really kind of tunable to what your needs are. Veterinary costs very low. And this sounds morbid, but if you have a sick chicken, probably not, it's never economically advantageous to call a veterinarian out to get your chicken looked at. Once again, kind of morbid. In most cases, it's better to put that animal down and replace it than it is to get, a veterinarian out there. So I'm saying that low, but once again, it depends how you feel about your chickens. I'll say that. Acreage, very, very low. In a commercial setting, broilers in a commercial chicken house, during the summer, they're usually stocked at a rate of about 1 square foot per bird. During the wintertime, to kind of share body heat, that's down to around 0.75 feet per bird. So, a 40,000 square foot chicken barn will hold 50,000 birds. Now, obviously, that's nothing that, any of us homesteaders are going into. But that kind of lets you know where the industry is and sort of, you're looking at square feet per bird and not acres per animal, if that makes any sense. One I kind of threw in here, aquaculture. It's a little out there. It's a little different. And basically I'm just going to click through these. It all varies. What does this look like? Well, this can be buying a bag of catfish when the fish truck comes to co-op and putting them in a pond. I know people that have, 10-foot round stock tanks, waters for cows that raise, tilapia in. That's a little more intense, a little more hands-on. But it's kind of an interesting one. Like I said, it falls a little bit on the outskirts of what we think about as being livestock. But it may be an option. Once again, kind of sit back and really think about what it is you're looking for to get out of your property and your homestead and see what that is. Once again, they're all very low, variable. And then, I'm kind of outside the box thinker. There's all kinds of other things, other livestock you can have. Rabbits. I know commercial rabbit producers that raise rabbits. Interesting little tidbit. One female rabbit can produce more meat per year than a female cow. When you grow out offspring and finish them out and all those things. Camelids, so this is going to be llamas, alpacas, not necessarily meat animals, can be fiber animals, guardian animals. I've had llamas in with some of my livestock. They make a fantastic guardian animal for other livestock, and they're just kind of fun to look at. Going back to A Holland over here, they're kind of cute. They're a little weird, but they're kind of cute. Bison. I actually have a producer who raises bison. They're more of a lawn ornament. He's not really getting any meat off of them or anything, but they look really cool. You need everything. Basically, they require everything that a beef cow does, except twice as much. They need fencing twice as strong. They need working facilities twice as expensive. They need twice as much feed. And then, like I said, there's some of those kind of outliers. Deer. I know some people that raise fallow deer, emu. That was a big industry back in the 90s. And then really whatever, there's all kinds of other things you can get into. Chinchilla farms used to be a thing, as odd as that is. So there's all kinds of things to think about. So leads me to my last slide here. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them right now. If you think of something later, I know we got Cody on the Zoom here. You can call your county extension agent, ask for a little more, specifics if you're looking into getting to something. So our phone's always on. Call, email, whatever you need to do, get a hold of us. We'd love to help you out. But with that, I'll kind of end with, are there any questions?
Yeah, so if y'all got any questions, make sure to ask them. And like Nick said, we're always here to help answer any questions y'all might have later on. So, well, if not, Nick, thank you for being here with us tonight. And
Absolutely. I know I can get a little long-winded, and I went a few minutes over, so I apologize. But
that's all good.
I really appreciate all y'all being here. And like I said, if you got any questions, give me or Cody a call, and love to hear from you.
All right. Well, I do appreciate it, y'all. We will see y'all next time.
Bye-bye.